Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine Bennis podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'll be talking about Season 2, Episode 11, The Chinese Restaurant. Hello everyone. Hope everyone's doing well out there. I'm doing well, just gearing up for back to school. We start school a little earlier than I'm accustomed to here in Colorado. I was used to school starting after Labor Day back in Michigan, but it starts really early here in Colorado, and it ends early as well, so it's all a wash, I guess. But for me, school starting in August always will seem early. And my daughter is starting middle school. Wow, I have a lot of emotions about that. I'm thrilled. She is very excited. Her locker and changing classes, and she's very, very excited. It's all optimism. And of course, why shouldn't it be? It is an exciting time. I remember being that way this summer before I started junior high. I had a junior high experience, which was only 7th and 8th grade. But I think most people had the 6th, 7th, and 8th middle school experience. At any rate, starting that new phase, middle school, junior high, whatever, I remember being very excited about that as well. And then having a pretty hard time. I think that's one of the few sort of universal experiences where most people can agree middle school sucks. And of course it does. That's the age you're starting puberty and these hormones are making you moody and your body's changing. And that is really uncomfortable at times. And you get self-conscious about things. Oh my gosh, it's a rough time. And so I'm just really trying to embrace my daughter's enthusiasm about it while keeping all of my worries sort of in the back of my head, not really projecting that onto her because, you know what? Once the drama does start, and yes, I am an optimist, but I know drama will start at some point, I will try my best to guide her through and draw on my own experiences and let her know you are not alone. I went through many, many dark and painful emotional times in junior high, middle school, and it's just part of it. And you will be a stronger person for it. I know that's what happened with me. I always say I would never relive my 7th grade year, but I'm also at the same time glad I went through it because it taught me a lot about priorities, I guess, and what to look for in friendships and what to focus on, even at that young age. So it was valuable, albeit extremely painful. My son is starting 3rd grade, and he's very excited as well. He has a couple of teachers, so they have in my kids' school, they separate them according to ability groups for different subjects. So he has a couple of teachers who my daughter had when she was in 3rd grade. So I'm familiar with them, and that's kind of nice. And he'll have that same experience I had as the younger sibling when a teacher might have had your older sibling as their student and be like, hey, aren't you so-and-so's little brother or little sister? So I always liked that, though. My brother was a really great student, had a great reputation, and so I always was proud to be his little sister whenever a teacher would recognize the last name. And well, let's face it, me and my brother were 2 of maybe 7 total Indian kids in the entire school district where we grew up. So it wasn't much of a mystery if they saw a Desai on their attendance sheet and looked up and saw a little girl who looked just like a little boy that they had a few years earlier. So I always liked that. I was very proud. All right, so let's get into the episode. The Chinese Restaurant. Arguably the first classic, iconic Seinfeld episode of the series. And so this is exciting. And it's such an interesting episode in so many ways. So let's just get into it. The synopsis from my coffee table book is as follows. Before seeing the classic B-movie Plan 9 from Outer Space, Jerry, Elaine, and George decide to get dinner without reservations at a Chinese restaurant. They spend the next 30 minutes trying unsuccessfully to get seated by the enigmatic maitre d', James Hong. Jerry bumps into a woman who works with his uncle, the same uncle Jerry broke dinner plans with to see the movie. George's efforts to phone his girlfriend keep being thwarted by other callers, while Elaine grows desperate for food. This episode was written by Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld, the dynamic duo. So the first scene, well, now here's where we already get into how this episode is so interesting. It's two acts, really. I can't even break it down by scene, unless I were to break it down by maybe camera angles, but that really wouldn't work. And so the first scene is just them entering the restaurant, and then the first half of them waiting for a table. So they walk in, and they're in the middle of a conversation about the police or needing more cops in the city. We get into this familiar kind of stand-up routine that Jerry Seinfeld has done where they need to combine cops and garbage men. I see cops standing around doing nothing. Grab a broom, sweep, 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 then go back to fighting crime. Elaine says, "You should run for mayor." Nobody listens. I love it when scenes start in the middle of a conversation. It's always been this device I think is great. In fact, I try to do that with my improv. And it is a actual technique that you get taught also. It's just saying, hey, start something in the middle so that there's a familiarity already between the characters, and you'll get to sort of the meat or how the relationships after that. But starting in the middle as a player, as someone who performs, I really like that technique because I feel like it's entertaining for the audience, and it really helps you as an actor to be able to have an emotion right out the gate if you just start with this middle of the conversation approach. Then the host comes up and they say they need a table, but wait, how many people? George kind of alludes to, well, I don't know if Tatiana, his girlfriend, will be joining them, but they end up saying 4, Seinfeld 4, and it'll be about 5-10 minutes. But even for Elaine, that is too long to wait. 5-10 minutes doesn't sound that long to me, but she is too hungry to wait. Let's just go somewhere else, she says. But Jerry says, no, we won't have time before the movie. They're on this timetable. Jerry reveals he lied to his uncle about seeing the movie. He was supposed to have dinner with his uncle. Now, we don't know if this is Uncle Leo. They never specify that, but I like to think it's Uncle Leo. Plan 9 from Outer Space. I guess it's the best bad movie amongst people who like that type of movie. And so it's one night. I had to see it tonight. I had no choice. Elaine wants Jerry to get menus because so we can order right when we sit down. But Jerry, nope, can't look at a menu until I'm seated at the table. Elaine says, everything has to be just so with you, doesn't it? It's a little bit more of an eye into Jerry's kind of fastidious nature and needing, his own little high maintenance qualities. George, in the meantime, is annoyed with this guy who's kind of just chit-chatting on a payphone. Here we go. Old tech. I'm kind of stealing that from the Office Ladies podcast, a fun podcast for any of you Office fans. Old tech alert, they say, whenever they see things like this. So the whole concept of waiting for a payphone, very antiquated, obviously, in this day and age. But, George is just waiting around and he's super annoying. You're not supposed to just chit-chat. It's a payphone. Jerry sees a woman in the distance sitting at a table. He knows her. Elaine doesn't know who it is. This party walks by them, bumps into Elaine a little bit, and they get sat right away. Elaine says, they weren't here before us. Oh, Jerry asks the host about it, and oh no, they were here before, says the host. Elaine is just hangry. I mean, I think we can all relate to this. And this is pretty much the Elaine storyline for the entire episode. I love this moment where she says, people are too happy when they get a table. God, it makes me sick. And Jerry just looks at her and says, boy, you are really hungry. I mean, these little annoyances, it's so relatable. When you are hungry, hangry, as people say, any little thing is going to set you off. So even just someone smiling as they're getting sat to a table is really going to get under your skin. George keeps trying to get this guy off the phone, trying to tell him, hey, I kind of really have to make this call, please. And he's just not really acknowledging him, or he just kind of gives him a smile and turns around. George asks Jerry if he can count on him in case something goes down here. And Jerry's like, yeah, I'm going to get into a rumble. And everything's annoying George about this guy. His outfit, everything's coordinated. Oh, under his skin. Classic George rant. Elaine mentions, this isn't fair. You should be sat according to how hungry you are. She could just go over and take food off someone's plate. I tell you what, Jerry says, there's $50 for you if you do that. So Jerry presents Elaine with this bet of $50 to go over to that table with the 3 couples, grab an egg roll, eat it, and walk away. Don't say anything. George is all for it for $50. He'd put his face in their soup and blow. She's a little bit weary, and I like when she clarifies, no, wait a second. I just want to make sure. I don't want to do it and come back and find out that I didn't put mustard on it or something. And Jerry's like, no. There's no trick here. I like that she knows Jerry enough to clarify that. So she says, all right, I'm doing it. And goes over there, confident, little bravado in her step. She gets over there. And we have one of these weird moments that just is, I find it hilarious. She's speaking through her teeth, kind of like a ventriloquist, where she basically offers this table $25 of the $50 she's going to get if they let her eat the egg roll. And she's trying to explain it. And they're an elderly table. They're a table of elderly couples. And they're just so confused. What? What did she say? What'd she say? And one of the voices is very obviously Larry David, trying to sound like an old person. Although he just sounds like Larry David to me. Elaine ends up chickening out. She runs back. They all laugh. She says they didn't have any idea what I was talking about. I offered them $25. And it was a cute moment between the 3 of them. Finally, the phone's free. But before George can get there, he gets cut off by this other woman. And she says, no, I didn't see you. And he's like, no, I've been standing here for 10 minutes. Well, if you were standing here, then you'd have the phone. This woman is played by Kate Benton, who she actually reappears in Seinfeld in the Pez dispenser episode. I believe she's one of the women at Jerry's apartment for the intervention that they end up having. So after she cuts George off and continues with using the phone, this is one of the funniest and best lines from George that I quote often. You know, we're living in a society. I love that he's really just yelling it at no one. It goes off and it's just kind of dies in the air. Doesn't really go anywhere. And he's just so fired up. I can't believe people. You know, people are just so rude. And then the guy who had been using the phone for so long, he walks by and just heartfelt apology, says, hey, sorry I took so long. And George forgives him right away. I think this is so relatable. Well, at least for me. I don't know. I can't say that for everyone now. I feel like people now are ruder than ever. But George is just forgiving and says, oh, no problem. You know, pats him on the shoulder and everything. I feel like I would totally do this. No worries. Even though just moments ago you were seething, your blood was boiling. Elaine just can't take it anymore. She's like, I got to walk around and look at people's food. While she's gone, George tells Jerry and explains the whole Tatiana incident, which in a nutshell, George has to take a shit and her apartment is so tiny. The bathroom's right there, no buffer zone. This whole monologue is so brilliantly written. A few of the things that I know this is a George moment, but I have to mention just a few of the terms used in this little monologue. So I love that he says the bathroom has no buffer zone. I think everyone can agree. A bathroom with no buffer zone is definitely not ideal. Another thing I said, he's fooling around and he knows he cannot stop this intestinal requirement. And even if he can extricate himself from the proceedings, it's so good. And this is what makes just a so-so monologue into a brilliant monologue. The wording of the way you're explaining things that many people have gone through, but when you word it in a way that people have never heard before, it just makes all the difference and elevates it to no end. So basically he explains he can't continue fooling around with her. This is not stopping. He needs to leave. And he just stops during, not after, but during, and says, I think it would be best for me to go. Now, I'm thinking if I were Tatiana, and with no explanation, this guy who, I think it's implied that they're in the middle of having sex at the most, at the least, maybe you're pretty far down the foreplay road. But at any rate, if I were Tatiana and this guy left in the middle of that, I think I'd just be like, yeah, I'm good. Especially with no explanation, just vaguely give some kind of I just need to leave, and then leaves. I don't think I'd be giving this guy another chance. So good for George. He found someone that's pretty forgiving. At the very least, I might see the guy again just to be like, hey, what happened there? Because I know I would be blaming myself. There'd be no doubt in my mind. Like, I did something about me just turned him off, and I'd just be feeling like crap about myself, when in fact, it was about his literal crap that took him away. So if anything, maybe I would go out with him again just to get an explanation. Elaine returns. God, she hates this place. Why did we come here? She's just getting that. It keeps heightening. Elaine's hangry state is just heightening, and she's just getting grumpier and grumpier. And then she gives that little speech about, remember when you went out with your parents and you went out to dinner and it was such a treat, and now I just feel like a sweaty hog waiting for them to fill up the trough. These ups and downs of emotions that Elaine is going through, brilliant. Love it. Elaine keeps asking Jerry to talk to the host and talk to him again. Jerry, for whatever reason, Jerry, in her mind, has the power to help them make some progress with getting a table. But then Mr. Cohen walks in. Hey, what stinks in here? Oh, this guy gets a table right away. Jerry can't stop himself saying, now, I know he just walked in. We've been waiting. And of course, they have to go through the whole rigmarole. What's your name? Name, please. Seinfeld. Oh, yes, Seinfeld 4. Yeah, well, what about this guy? Oh, Mr. Cohen's always here. He's always here? What does that mean? Mr. Cohen lives on Park Avenue. And then I just love where am I? Is this a dream? What in God's name is going on here? Just nothing's making sense. Well, George had to leave Tatiana a message. She isn't there. Oh, that just makes George even more panicky. She was probably waiting, but all those people were on the phone. Oh, then that familiar woman walks up. Jerry is like, oh, I know her. So he gives some very general chit chat. And then Elaine helps out and says, hi, I'm Elaine. Oh, I'm sorry. This is my friend Elaine. I'm Lorraine Catalano. Okay, so now we know it's Lorraine Catalano who works with Jerry's uncle, the same uncle who he lied to about his plans. Lorraine is played by Judy Kane. Wow, Judy Kane has been in everything. She's another one of these character actors who, if you're familiar with like any TV in the last, I think like 40 years, you'd be like, oh, she looks really familiar. She's done, I think her IMDb said something upwards of like 300 commercials. She's been in numerous television shows, movies. Yeah, she's just been in everything. I recognized her from some Friends episodes. I recognized her from commercials. Yeah, she's just a very recognizable actress. Been working very steadily since 1978, actually. So Lorraine leaves, and Jerry is just like, oh my gosh, she's going to tell my uncle. And then my uncle will tell my mother. And oh, it's just the chain reaction of calls. This will set off New York to Long Island to Florida. Oof, not good. Jerry got caught. So the purpose of this scene, it's our opening setup scene, but this whole episode is very unorthodox to the structure that, thus far we are familiar with. I mean, there's really just an act break with the commercial that separates the two big scenes. And so in this scene, we learn about each character's issue or conflict. George needing the phone, Jerry recognizing that woman, and then knowing that the woman works with his uncle, and Elaine basically just being completely over the top hungry. So my overall take, one of the reasons this is what is considered, the first kind of classic Seinfeld episode of the series is that it was completely different than any other regular show. I mean, forget about the earlier episodes of Seinfeld, but it wasn't structured like any show at the time. This is essentially what we call in the improv world. I know you guys love hearing about my improv world. It's called a mono scene. So it all takes place on one set, and it's in real time. This one's in real time. Not all mono scenes have to be in real time, but this one is, and it just was not done. It was not done before. And I'll get more into how the network received this, when they got the script a little bit later. I really enjoyed everything about it, from the pacing to each character's plot within this bigger plot of waiting for a table. So there was like all these mini plots, and all the exposition comes out very naturally, that the movie has them on a timetable. And that was actually added by Larry Charles. He mentions this in the Inside Look. He added that whole movie thing so that there were some stakes about getting the table in a timely fashion, just beyond, Elaine's hunger and stuff. It was like, no, they have to get to this movie. He loves Plan 9 from Outer Space, so he thought, well, that can be the movie that they need to see, and it's like a one night only kind of thing. And I mentioned it earlier, but the hangry thing is so relatable, and I loved how Julia Louis-Dreyfus played this. Very convincing. I mean, the fact that 5 or 10 minutes is too long for her to wait. I mean, we get the idea right away how hungry she is. She'd rather go somewhere else. And then that just keeps building and heightening, like I said before. I mean, this is such a long scene. When I was making notes for this episode, I was finding it kind of hard. I'm like, God, I have to remember so much, because usually, when the scenes are only 3 or 4 minutes long, I can just really break down my thoughts. But I'm like, okay, this is like at least a 10-minute scene. So let me figure out how to talk about it. So some of the highlights, I love how Jerry points out that moment, boy, you're really hungry, after Elaine is so disgusted by people who get called for a table. It's enough to make you sick. I certainly love the bet that Jerry poses to Elaine, that weirdo talking through her teeth moment and then running back. It's a little anticlimactic, but true to life. I probably would have chickened out as well and ran away just like she did, but I thought it would have been a cool, maybe it was a little too sitcom-y of a moment, but what if she did really eat it, and what could that have brought out as far as comedy? But the fact that they made her kind of run away, I think that was actually probably the better choice. I love George recounting the whole Tatiana situation. Now, I do have to say, I really wish they would have gotten Elaine's take on it. Elaine was gone for, George's recounting of what happened to Jerry. And I realized that George probably wouldn't want to admit what happened with Tatiana in front of Elaine, but I think that would have been a fun interaction, getting her feedback. But maybe at this point, I'm thinking they weren't there yet with what George and Elaine and their relationship and what they were comfortable with, discussing with each other. So I understand why it wasn't like that. But again, it's hard for me not to jump forward and think of their later relationship, when I don't think he would have any trouble, like let's say in like season 6 or 7, right? Like he wouldn't have any trouble telling this story and getting Elaine's take on it. Now, I do love this opening act. It was all entertaining. I do wish they would have given Elaine a little bit more than just being hangry. George has the phone call plus the backstory with Tatiana. Jerry has the familiar woman and then lying to his uncle. Elaine, her only thing to work with is just being super hungry. So just in my opinion, I wish she would have had something else, some other maybe interaction at the restaurant that, could have added or maybe given her something else to play with. So then we come back after commercial. I'm calling scene 2 after commercial, or act 2. Jerry says, I'm telling you, if we don't get a table right now, we are not making this movie. And we get another look it from Elaine. Love the look it. She goes, look it, let's just slip him some money. $20, they decide. George says, $20? What do you want to give him? Change? Well, they'll split it 776. Of course, George will pitch in the $6. Such a cheapo. George can't do it, though. He can't do the bribe. He once tried to do that at the roller derby and almost got arrested. The roller derby? George goes to roller derbies. Who knew? Elaine then turns to Jerry. Well, then it has to be you. And he says, well, what about you? Well, I can't do that. It's a guy thing. And Jerry says, the women's movement really has made no progress in the world of bribery, have they? And, well, that just turns Elaine right around and says, give me it. I'll do it. She completely fucks it up. She lays the 20 down, doesn't even notice it. He turns the page over on top of it. And then she just panics and eventually tells him to take it. Take it. I'm hungry. Just take it. He does take it and then calls another party. George and Jerry are disgusted by her performance. Jerry tries to get the money back, goes and talks to the host again. And I do like how they keep having to go through the, what's your name? And yeah, Seinfeld 4. I like how they always have to go through that routine every time. I did like the moment where he says, you see that woman with the long hair? There was a misunderstanding. Oh, yes, she's very beautiful. Is your girlfriend? Well, we actually did date, but that's not really relevant here. The delivery of that line is very good by Jerry Seinfeld. Of course, it's still 5-10 minutes. Jerry just says, look, we're not going to make it. Let's just get it to go. We'll eat it in the cab. Chinese food in the cab or at the movie? What do you think? There are big picnic tables set up? Why don't we just go to Sky Burger? No, I don't want to go to Sky Burger. Well, then we'll just eat popcorn. I can't eat popcorn for dinner. Hot dogs? I'd rather like food off the floor. In the middle of this kind of back and forth about what to do about dinner, we hear the host yelling Cartwright really loud. Cartwright, Cartwright, over and over. George kind of notices it, but he's just, listening to Jerry and Elaine argue. So then he says, I can't go anywhere anyway, you guys. I have to wait for Tatiana. She's going to call me here. Let me just check to see if she called. Well, turned out Cartwright was Costanza. And this exchange. First of all, James Hong just nails it as this maitre d'. I love it. I love his performance. And then when he explains that he tells this woman on the phone that Cartwright's not there, and she yells a curse word and he hangs up the phone. I love that. And then I love George's just dejected way of telling Jerry and Elaine, he yelled Cartwright. Who's Cartwright? I'm Cartwright. You're not Cartwright. Of course I'm not Cartwright. And that was it. He's like, I'm not in the mood. You guys go ahead. And Elaine's not in the mood either. She's going to Sky Burger. And then Jerry says, well, I can't go see a bad movie by myself. I'll just go see my uncle. Then there's a moment where George says, well, should we tell them that we're leaving? And Elaine's just like, whatever. Why would we ever do that? Let's just get out of here. As soon as they walk out the door, what happens? Seinfeld 4. So the purpose of this scene, this is our wrap-up scene, our wrap-up second act. Everything ramps up with Elaine's hunger. Jerry is convinced they will run out of time. George misses Tatiana's call because he was not aware that he was, in fact, Cartwright. The overall take, I mean, it's, again, this is a very strong episode. I'll say that, before my final notes, but this is a great second act where everything has to get wrapped up and everything's heightened to the point where they just all give up on this whole restaurant and eating there. So some highlights for me from this second act of the episode. I love the challenge to Elaine to be the one to slip the host the $20. And Jerry knows what he was doing. Jerry knows that the way to goad her is by challenging her feminism. And, well, she just takes the bait. And I love how her attempt ends in her begging him to take it and then losing the money. The begging part is so, to me, that's really, really funny. And now look, I mean, maybe this could have been seen. So, I always have that little kind of voice in the back of my head saying, oh my gosh, now they're showing like a woman can't do it, But I like that she's just one of the guys in this moment. Look, she did blow it, and George would have blown it too. He already admitted that. So she's just like one of the guys, and they rib her about it when she gets back. And this is where we're seeing her gender kind of take a back seat to just being a friend. And they didn't really care about her feelings here, and good, I'm glad. And that's a weird thing to be excited about, I realize, but at the core, that's why, that's a lot of why I love the dynamic of the foursome. They are all equally insensitive to each other's feelings, so I love those moments. I have always loved that Cartwright moment, that scene where George is trying to figure out what happened with the Cartwright thing. James Hong plays it so well, just obliviously explaining what happened, not at all acknowledging that he said Cartwright instead of Costanza, and it's just perfect the way he says it. And then I love she said curse word, I hang up. Just gold. And that final moment, I love this. It's very short, but the final moment when they're leaving, I love how furious Elaine is when George, just says, well, should we tell him we're leaving? When she goes, what for? Let's just get out of here. Like she kind of just even shoulders her way between them. Her hunger is just so beyond hangry at that point. And again, I know how she feels. I've been at that level of just needing to eat and everything around me is pissing me off. So just the way she says that, let's just get out of here. I love it. I love it so much. Okay, let's take a quick break, and I will see you on the other side.
We've all been there, sitting in a restaurant waiting for a table. You know you're hungrier than everyone. Your empty belly churns as you watch that couple get seated before you. They are laughing and smiling. They aren't as hungry as you are. But how can you really know that? Leave all that uncertainty behind when you visit the Neatery Eatery. Our diners are set according to hunger priority. That's right. There's no first come, first serve at the Neatery Eatery. We at the Neatery Eatery subscribe to a triage approach, similar to a hospital emergency room. I mean, does a woman in labor have to wait until the guy with the fractured wrist gets treated? No. Upon arriving at the Neatery Eatery, your hunger needs are assessed by a panel of hosts we call the Neatery Eatery Teamery. They will ask you a series of questions and hook you up to our Neatery Eatery machinery, which displays the volume and frequency of the growls coming from your stomach. After the Neatery Eatery Teamery reviews the data from the Neatery Eatery machinery, everyone is sat according to hunger level. Finally, a restaurant that considers your needs and not just your arrival time. Please visit the Neatery Eatery near you. And come hungry, because that matters. Please allow at least 45 minutes for your hunger assessment.
And we're back. Okay, so the DVD extras, there was an inside look. Jerry Seinfeld talks about he remembers Larry David jotting this idea down for this very episode at the Chinese restaurant Genghis Cohen. He says, I remember we were sitting waiting for a table and Larry said, this should be an episode. Warren Littlefield from NBC was interviewed and he just talks about how nothing happens. He got the script and he was just beside himself and he kept saying, am I missing something here? Nothing happens. JLD just adored the episode. As soon as she read it, she said it read like a play, and I absolutely adored it. I loved it, and the network hated it. Just like Warren Littlefield said, they just didn't get it. There was a moment, Michael Richards, who is not in the episode, Kramer was not written into this episode. Michael Richards, in an interview in the Inside Look, said he was really hurt and upset he wasn't in the episode because he read the script and he could tell this is something special, and was just really heartbroken that he wasn't included. And Larry David said at that time that was part of the character. They were sort of going for this Kramer's only in the building, he doesn't go out with the group kind of dynamic. You know, that was just how it was at the moment, but it didn't prevent Michael Richards from feeling very, very hurt and left out. You know, they said, but they did mention, Larry David said, well, look, if this episode had been written a season later, then he definitely would have been in it. But at that time, we were still trying to figure out, would Kramer go out with them? We didn't think so at the time. The network held onto this episode. So like I've said before, sometimes they aired episodes out of order. And this episode was taped way before. I think it was taped in December of 1990, but it didn't air until May of 1991. So the network held it back because they thought it would just be a total bomb and they didn't want to risk putting it kind of in the meaty part of the season. In the notes about nothing, when they walk into the restaurant, they were supposed to be having a different conversation, which was about their least favorite holiday of the year. Elaine picked the 4th of July. You know, all these sociopaths with explosive. You're walking down the street and then boom! George's least favorite holiday was Halloween. He found that the constant ringing of the doorbell was very jarring, and he absolutely hates adults in costumes. Jerry said his least favorite holiday was New Year's Eve because he's like, everyone makes such a big deal out of it, but it's really just kind of trying to get the last of the mustard out of the jar, just trying to make something out of that last day of the year. Which I thought was really funny because I'm guilty of that. For years, I would put all this pressure on New Year's Eve. Like it had to be this like life-changing night. And it always disappointed me. And it got me thinking, what would be my least favorite holiday? I really don't hate a holiday, but I guess if I had to pick one, I would say Easter. And that's only because, and it's not at all about what the holiday is about with its religious background of it, but it was more because as a Hindu, we didn't do anything for Easter. And I'd always get asked as a kid to explain that, why don't you get an Easter basket? And every kid, no one seemed to remember year after year. So every year I would have to explain, no, we don't celebrate Easter. And it was really more confusing because they'd be like, well, you get Christmas presents and you put up a Christmas tree. So we celebrated the non-religious aspects of Christmas, but we didn't participate in anything having to do with Easter. So it was just one of those things as a kid I always had to kind of explain, no, I don't get an Easter basket. And now as an adult, as a family, we're pretty agnostic religion-wise. So now I'm dealing with whether or not to quote unquote celebrate Easter with my kids by getting them an Easter basket and doing Easter egg hunts. And we've done it on and off, but I'm not consistent with it. And now my kids are hearing about their friends getting Easter baskets and going to Easter egg hunts and all that stuff. So anyway, it's just an oddly stressful holiday for me. So if I were to pick my least favorite holiday, it would be Easter. A little fun fact, the guy who plays the phone hog in the beginning of the episode, the one who George can't stand his outfit, he comes back later in the puffy shirt episode. He plays the photographer who is taking photos of George's hands during his short-lived career as a hand model. All right, moving on to Contributor Corner. Maybe we should just call it Greg Corner because reliable Greg every week. He comes in with some really great thoughts. So this week, Greg had to say about the Chinese restaurant. When I think of Seinfeld as a series, this episode really sums up the style of the show almost better than any other. The entire plot is the conversation happening while waiting for a table in a restaurant. While Kramer is noticeably absent, I think this whole setup works better without him. Adding him to the mix would have disrupted the simpleness of the premise. I love episodes of sitcoms that take place at one location in real time with all or most of the characters present. The series Friends would do this once a season as a budgetary move because of no need for multiple sets to be used, and limited speaking roles outside of the main cast would be necessary as well. And those episodes were often their best ones. Yeah, I do like this. And just to hone in on your comment, Greg, about Kramer disrupting the flow of this, I tend to agree. This episode was jam-packed with very grounded, normal things that happen while you're waiting for a table. I don't know how Kramer would have fit into that, to be honest. I feel awful for Michael Richards being extremely hurt about not being included, but I do find myself going, okay, well, what could Kramer have been doing? I feel like they would have had to make something maybe a little bit bizarre or absurd to make it fit with the Kramer character. But then again, it could have been awesome. But I do agree that it works better with the three of them, the three more grounded ones, because this episode really, as you say, Greg, kind of sums up a lot of what's great about the show, where it's this relatable stuff that people can see themselves going through as well. And Greg goes on to say, I love Elaine's arc of hanger as this all plays out. She was already hungry going in, and other than a couple lighthearted moments, she is genuinely getting more and more mad as time passes. Elaine is brilliant in this entire episode and delivers every line and emotion perfectly. George would be the one who would usually get mad in a setup like this, but because he is distracted by this whole Tatiana issue and is trying to get use of the payphone, Elaine is given the angry part. Ooh, yes, I didn't really even think about it that way. George, it would be classic George to get upset about a table and people getting sat before them. Thank you, Greg, for pointing that out, because they sort of outsource the anger to Elaine because George has enough to worry about since he ran out to take a shit, and hasn't talked to Tatiana since. So yeah, that totally makes sense. And Elaine being given that angry part, they needed someone else to do that, because it's a very real emotion you would feel when you're getting frustrated in the lobby of a restaurant waiting for a table. Next, Greg says, my favorite part of the episode is when Jerry dares Elaine to eat the spring roll off the stranger's plate. I love how she's giggling and psyching herself into doing it, and how childish yet funny it is. Jerry is right. They wouldn't say anything because in that scenario, people would be so shocked at what they're seeing they wouldn't speak, and they would tell that story to their friends. I have a friend who I do these kinds of dares with, and we talk about them for years and years afterward. Elaine's ventriloquist face as she tries to warn the people about what she's going to do and offers them the money is adorable. I don't quite get why she would do this given she has her back to Jerry George, but it's funny nonetheless. Yeah, I think she does it because Jerry does specify don't say anything. So she doesn't want to mess anything up with the off chance, like, oh, what if Jerry, even though she has her back to them, maybe he might kind of sneak up just to check on her or something. So I think that's why she's really committing to the rules while breaking the rules. So the ventriloquism, while unsuccessful, she felt was very necessary. And yeah, just like that big smile and just saying it. And clearly it was a voiceover that they had recorded because her lips don't move pretty much at all. The next Greg comment, another Elaine moment I enjoyed is when she is recanting what it was like to go to a restaurant as a kid and how exciting it was to see food you'd never seen before. And now she's just a big sweaty hog waiting for them to fill the trough for her. We've all been there. I also like how she tries to bribe the host for a table, something she wasn't going to do because it's a guy thing, until Jerry sort of forces her to with his comment about the women's movement. Elaine will always stand by her principles, sort of like how in a later episode, Jerry asks her if she'd date a guy who was pro-life. I actually respect her a lot because she stands by what she believes when push comes to shove. Yes, like I mentioned earlier, Elaine, if she's going to be questioned or challenged about her principles or her feminism, no, that's not going to happen. But then again, I also like how it failed miserably as well. You know, look, she still went for it, but she fumbled through it, and it's never mentioned, but it's because she's so hungry. She couldn't do the bribe. She was too hungry to concentrate on how to do it and how to execute it. And Greg's final comment. My favorite line in the episode is when Jerry is offering alternatives so that they could make the movie, and when he suggests a hot dog at the theater, Elaine angrily says, "A movie hot dog? I'd rather lick the food off the floor." Her disgust is both understandable and hilarious. It perfectly depicts how upset she is. Nobody does sarcastic disgust like Julia Louis-Dreyfus, both in how she says the line and the face she makes while delivering it. Her performance in this episode is perfection. Chef's kiss. Agreed. Yes. Hangry Elaine, I'm calling it, is fantastic. And yeah, I mean, this is really, we're seeing the fully formed Elaine. We've seen bits and pieces of it up until now, but this is fully formed, like, fuck this shit, Elaine. No, I'm not going to do this. No, this sucks. Like, I love this side of Elaine. And yeah, that moment was great. A movie hot dog. And even the popcorn thing. I've had friends who, when we've made plans for like dinner and a movie and like some things have gotten messed up or we've run out of time, kind of similar to this, and be like, well, we'll just eat at the theater. The idea of having popcorn for dinner is just so gross to me. And I love popcorn. I'm not knocking popcorn, but that's not a meal. So for me, when she says that, it was relatable to me, going like, I can't have popcorn for dinner. I need something real. I need a meal. Thank you so much, Greg, for your comments once again. If you would like to become a contributor for Hot and Heavy, the Elaine Benes podcast, please email me at elainepodcast@gmail.com. That's elainepodcast@gmail.com. And your comments could be read on a future episode. Moving on to my favorite Elaine moments. The egg roll moment. I love her talking through her teeth. Just talked about it again with Greg's comments, but the talking through her teeth and then running away, it's adorable, perfectly played. And all of the super annoyed moments, all of it. The hangry Elaine, so fun to watch. And that shove out the door is so relatable. Again, I know, like I mentioned before, it's such a little moment, but the way she says, let's just get out of here. I mean, it's... That is peak, hangry, annoyed, disgusted Elaine. And there's just nothing better. As Greg said, chef's kiss to that. Mwah. My final notes. This is such a classic episode, and it deserves to be. Another example of this show that was led by two guys who had little to no clue about how network sitcoms worked. This episode is an example of them just pushing forward with their ideas to sort of disrupt that structure that we were all used to. And that risk paid off. I mean, I love that backstory that the network was so unsupportive and that it turned out to be this iconic episode. Those are the stories I love where, it's risky, right? I mean, I think so many of us, I know me certainly, it would be scary to say to a big network who is paying for your show to be on the air and paying you this money, and you keep pushing back because you're saying like, no, I believe in this. This is how much I believe in that. So that is something I just greatly admire in both Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld, because that comes up a lot when they talk about how this show was so different and received so poorly at first, and how they just had faith in their ability to know funny. And that kind of keeps coming up again and again. So this episode to me really is all of that in a nutshell. That just makes me love the episode that much more. Elaine in this episode is very much equal to the guys here. I guess it can be argued if you were to compare all of them and what they were dealing with in this episode, George probably had the most substance, since there was this backstory with Tatiana that bled into the whole needing the phone. While Elaine only had the hunger thing going for her, she still had a lot of comedic opportunity throughout the episode. So I really appreciated all the moments that JLD got to play with. I do wish she had something other than the hanger, like I said before, something else to contribute. I mean, at least Jerry had the lie, to the uncle, seeing Lorraine and the movie. I just wish there was another element to what Elaine had going on. I mean, hanger is powerful, of course, and it's a lot to play with. And like I said earlier, it kept getting heightened and heightened as the episode went on, which is very fun to play with as an actor. But I just wish there was something a little bit extra for her. But at least she was in the episode and not left out like Michael Richards, poor guy. And finally, I just really want Chinese food now. Watching the episode, writing my notes about the episode, talking about the egg roll, the spring roll, I'm just craving it right now. And I love a spring roll, let me tell you. Okay, I think that's all I can say about the Chinese restaurant. Such a fun episode. Oh, so glad to get to this point. I was really excited to cover this one. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.